quorum present, so when you're ready, you can proceed with the meeting.
Okay, I just got something on my thing. I can't get rid of it. Okay, got it. Okay, I'll share my video. Right, so you hear me loud and clear? Okay.
Yes, we can.
So good morning, everyone, and welcome to the virtual meeting of Governance and Council Operation for October 4th. We will begin the roll call. Mr. Clerk.
Members of committee, I will call your name. Please indicate your presence. Councillor Vasante.
Good morning, I'm here.
Thank you. Councillor Medeiros. Councillor Medeiros.
Be here, Peter.
Thank you. Councillor Williams.
I'm here.
Thank you. Councillor Dillon.
Morning.
Thank you. And Chair Fortini is present. All members are present as well. For the record, non-committee members, Councillor Santos and Councillor Paleshi are present as well.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Clerk. So our next item is approval of the agenda. Does any member wish to add any business item on today's meeting? Please use the chat function or the speakers list. Mr. Clerk, I don't see any in the chat box. So any additional information? Okay, so we'll move on. Moved by this council, the approval of the council this meeting by Councillor Medeiros. All in favor? So instead of seeking a recorded vote of this item, I will ask if there's anyone opposing of the motion, or otherwise your vote will count in the form of it. Thank you. I see no objection. We'll carry on. So delegation, Mr. Clerk, we don't have any. So seeing none, the clerk will note the minutes for this meeting for the minutes. Okay, and consent items. I don't see any announcements, none. The delegation, Mr. Clerk, there's none?
There are none, Mr. Chair.
Okay, that presentation. So we'll move on to 9.1. This is our next, the 9th is the discussion of virtual and in-person hybrid meeting of council. So Mr. Clerk, discussion is all yours.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and good morning, members of committee. We wanted to put this item on the agenda as we've been in what we'll call virtual meeting mode for well over a year and a half. And at this point, the prognosis seems like we will be continuing this for some time. So I just wanted to provide a bit of context and then open the floor for any conversation or discussion from the committee, in particular about what's working, what's not working, and if there's any areas for improvement, as this probably will be the reality for the foreseeable future at least. Just a bit of context. So if you look at, for a point of benchmarking, in 2019, the City Clerk's Office supported 186 meetings, all in-person meetings, whether it's City Council, standing committees, advisory committees, tribunals, Committee of Adjustment, things like that. When the pandemic, or when the COVID-19 hit in 2020, we'd already reached 37 in-person meetings before things shut down in the middle of March. And then from that point on till the end of 2020, we found a way to support 111 remote virtual meetings, which really brought our total for the year end for 2020 to 148 meetings. So a bit of a significant drop of almost 40 meetings over 2019, which was a typical year. And primarily the reason for that is a number of advisory committees were suspended during the summer. They started to reconvene later in the fall. And for a while, members will remember we were just having special council meetings in March and April. And we didn't restart Committee of Council till later in the spring, and then Planning Committee later starting in the summer. If we would put that in context for 2021 so far, we are starting to head back into a sense of normalcy in terms of the number of meetings, including today's meeting. We've supported 147 meetings, remote virtual meetings in all cases. And we expect that there's another 28 meetings which are scheduled before the end of the year. So we're looking at a probably 2021 meeting target of about 175 meetings to support, which is comparable to the 186 that we supported in person in 2019. So we are getting back to normal. But there are some significant differences in terms of supporting a remote meeting, as well as I can appreciate what the members are feeling in terms of participation in a remote meeting versus an in-person meeting. In terms of how we got to here and what our procedure bylaw allows council and its committees to continue to do for the foreseeable future. When COVID hit in 2019, the province put some emergency amendments into the Municipal Act to allow remote meetings to occur in the emergency situation. And then subsequently in the summer of 2020, the province further amended the Municipal Act that says, notwithstanding whether there's an emergency or not, municipalities can put rules in their procedure bylaw to allow for remote meetings to continue. So it doesn't have to be an emergency circumstance, and by remote meetings it means a quorum doesn't have to be present, a physical quorum. Members can vote remotely, and remote meetings can be used for closed session as well. So in that vein, council, on a recommendation from staff, we have amended our procedure bylaw, which basically says that remote meetings, such as the meeting today and other meetings that we've talked about, can continue so long as there is an emergency in effect, whether declared locally through the head of council, through the mayor, or provincially. And after those states of emergency have been lifted, then remote meetings can continue for 1 year. And then after that 1 year period, council can decide simply by resolution, if they so choose, to continue having remote meetings. So we do have a backup plan, I guess, if you want to call that, in our procedure bylaw that basically says that once the states of emergency have been lifted, and we understand, I believe the provincial one has, but the local municipal one has not been lifted yet. So we will continue with remote meetings until and after all the states of emergency have been lifted for at least a year after that, unless council decides otherwise. So one thing to put in perspective with remote meetings is it has been a lot of work, and I don't want to underestimate that in terms of both working with our AV partners who help us support live streaming and recording meetings. Certainly there's been a lot of work from our digital innovation and IT staff to help us set up the preconditions and the infrastructure for supporting virtual meetings. I will say that I think if there's any silver lining, I think the foresight and the improvements to the council chamber that occurred in 2019, so starting the last term of council and straddling over this term of council, did help set up the chamber with some of the technology basic infrastructure to help us facilitate remote meetings. So that was very helpful. We heard from a lot of other municipalities that struggled early on in terms of trying to get infrastructure in place. Public participation, we worried about would possibly suffer. I think probably in the early days, it didn't necessarily suffer, but the public didn't have an easy venue to get in to participate in the public decision making. So we tried to encourage written delegations, written comments on matters before council or its committees for decision making. Eventually we went to virtual delegations, and that seems to be working well. We haven't finished some of our analysis in terms of has the level of public participation subsided or not, or dropped off versus in person. Certainly if you think about some of the planning committee meetings recently, the level of public participation is quite strong still, so I think that hasn't suffered necessarily now. People are adjusting to that. But the one thing to note is that the level of support for a virtual meeting. And just to put it in perspective, and we've heard this from municipalities and clerks' offices across the province, is a typical in-person meeting you would see possibly 2-3 clerk staff at the clerk's table supporting the meeting, not necessarily any IT staff. Because it wasn't necessary, because the IT infrastructure was in place. They were on call if needed, and our AV staff to actually produce the meeting and live stream it and add some information about what's being discussed on the screen, some overlays. Since we've gone to remote meetings, that has increased at least double. And we're hearing this from other clerks' office. So just as an example, for a remote meeting, it needs to be clerked. Someone has to clerk it. We usually have a legislative coordinator who is in attendance, the deputy clerk. As you can appreciate, Charlotte's been involved in meetings in terms of having information on the screen, the motions, so people can see what it is that's being voted on. We have people now that are time stamping our items in our agenda management system, so they can be available for specific playback by the public after the meeting. And we have other support that are on call. And in particular, we have IT support. So we not only, most times have at least one person, and some meetings at least two people physically in the chambers in the event that there is a technical issue, and there have been, and they've helped resolve them, which has been very helpful. And online as well, in our meeting, each of our meetings, we have at least one and sometimes two IT staff present remotely so they can help troubleshoot connection issues should they arise. So it is quite a labor-intensive process. I don't want to underestimate that. But it has been working. So I think we're pretty proud generally of how we've been able to help pull this off and facilitate this. But we do see an opportunity to hear comments, hear questions from members to see if there are areas that we need to improve. In terms of the prognosis looking forward, what we're hearing from other municipalities is generally they're looking at probably a three-step approach to getting back to in-person meetings. I think everybody recognizes where we're at with our Step 3 provincial guidelines and the limitations that continue to be in place for public gatherings, indoors in particular, and in the requirement for physical distancing and wearing masks. We're probably looking to continue that for the foreseeable future. It looks like we're going to be in Step 3 for some time. So what we're hearing from other municipalities is they're basically taking a three-pronged approach. First is continue with remote meetings for the foreseeable future, probably till the end of 2021 at the very least. Having members participate remotely, not having the public physically in the chambers, but participating remotely, and having as few staff as possible in the physical space to actually support the meeting. The second step would be the possibility if, sometime later in the fall, there's some milestones of early November, perhaps assessing to see whether or not a few members of council wish to come into the chambers to participate in meetings in person. So there would be, and that's what we refer to as a hybrid meeting, where you have some members physically in person participating in the meeting and the balance of members participating remotely. And then a third step would be if things do improve considerably, that possibly we get to the point maybe early 2022 that the public can then return to the chambers for participation in in-person meetings. So there's a lot there. There's probably a lot of questions that members may have. So I just wanted to give a bit of an overview of where we're at and where we're going and how we continue to support these meetings. And we'd be happy to answer any questions and most importantly, hear some feedback in terms of how we can improve the meetings, both from the members' perspective, the public perspective, for access and transparency, and to ensure that there's effective decision-making continuing at the city.
Thank you, Peter. We do have a couple of speakers. Councillor Vicente.
Thank you, Chair, and through you, Chair, to the City Clerk and to our staff. I will say unequivocally that you can be proud of the work that you have done to transition us to this virtual format. I think, speaking for all members of council, our perspective that the transition has been very smooth, and staff have made it very straightforward for members to participate virtually and to help us to comply with the orders. I think, speaking just from a personal perspective with regard to when we may resume, I think many of us may feel that we're ready to resume tomorrow. But I think that there is one thing from my perspective that is holding me back, and that is the fact that although members of council are vaccinated, I'm vaccinated, double, and so that means that if I were to contract COVID, I would have very minimal symptoms and would get over it quite quickly, and that could happen multiple times over the next couple of months in theory. I have one member of my family, my youngest son, who is not vaccinated yet, and so he is at risk. And so I think of him when I think about my day-to-day activities. And so there are other members of council as well who have young children, and I think that that is an important factor. So hopefully soon, in the next few months, children under 12 will be able to participate in the vaccination program. And then I think we will all breathe a little bit easier when that takes place. With respect to the public participation, it's been my gauge that public participation, if anything, has, I think, increased the ability to log on through a laptop or a personal device to be able to participate in a meeting, I think in many ways it's just another way that has equalized access by members of the public to council and committee proceedings. To the clerk's point, participation at planning has not waned. At Committee of Adjustment and others, despite the fact that it is a lot of work for staff and IT staff to make these things happen, the participation, I think, has been robust. So my question through you, Chair, to Peter Fay, once we do Zoom in person, would we have the ability to offer always, in perpetuity, as an option for someone to be able to access, obviously they can watch council meetings and committee meetings as they happen, but would we have some kind of facility to allow delegations to occur either in person, where council is meeting in person, but also where council is meeting in person for someone to delegate virtually? Can that be looked into and made possible going forward in the future?
Through you, Mr. Chair, yes, that's a great question, and it is a possibility. It is one of the things that we are considering as we look at the procedure bylaw review. So yeah, we have the capability now to do that. So if it's council's wish to continue to allow both in-person and virtual delegations, whether it's real-time participation or we've seen a few times video delegations submitted, if it does, it satisfies the principle of increasing public awareness, engagement, and participation, then I think it's something that council should consider, yes.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Clerk, and through you, Chair. I think that is definitely something we should consider, because I remember in the past a lot of discussions, for example, around the timing of council meetings and whether that provides opportunity and equal access for folks who perhaps are working or are in other situations. The ability to, if you are dedicating the time to listen in and to participate, despite not being at City Hall, I think is very, very powerful. And that is definitely something that we should encourage. And I would ask for this committee to ask staff to ensure that that remains in place after we resume in-person meetings. Thank you. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Vicente. I was going to ask the same thing. So very good. We got Councillor Paleshi. Thank you for joining us. Go ahead. The floor is yours.
Mr. Chair, thank you for allowing me the opportunity to ask a question. Thank you, Peter, for the presentation. Peter, my questions relate to any type of hybrid model or anything that we may be thinking of as we're starting to ease restrictions. Within the corporation now, is there any particular, in each of the commissioners' offices, have they requested that their departments start bringing anybody back within the corporation? And I don't mean any of the ones that were always required to be in physical to their office because of their position for whatever reason, but more so, has any commissioner requested that they start bringing people back, or have they already started bringing people back into the office?
Through you, Mr. Chair, perhaps I could start, but I'll probably just echo, and then maybe the CEO or others may want to comment. There is a corporate directive right now that's been in place throughout the pandemic in terms of number of staff that can be physically in a work location, and the current directive is 25% of staff complement to be in person working at any one time, just to ensure that there's physical separation, minimize the risk of transmission, things like that. The current prognosis is to do an assessment at the end of October, at the end of this month, and that possibly could go up to, I believe it may be 60%, but the CEO or others may have more precise information. What we're seeing in other municipalities, and Ottawa seems to be one of the benchmarks that other municipalities are looking to, is there's still a almost a request that in terms of council and committee meetings, that staff continue to participate remotely. So I'm not sure what their internal capacity limits are in person for work, for day-to-day work. But that seems to be the way to proceed. The other thing I will point out is if we were to go down a path to start saying staff come in for meetings, as I look in the chambers right now, we have set aside reserved seating in the public gallery, and with the physical spacing that we would have to maintain for 2 meters masking, I believe the capacity limit for an indoor meeting space like this is still at 25. We only have 18 seats in the gallery that are available for public access and or staff access. So if staff were starting to come in physically to participate in chambers and meetings, we would have to either space people out, have them participate still remotely from their office, even if they're at City Hall or another city work facility, and or we've been looking at contingencies of having staff, for example, participate from the committee room remotely if they have to be in City Hall. So we are looking at those options, but right now the standard is 25% city staff in physically working, and that may go up depending on what happens with the COVID outlook, up to 60% in November.
Okay, and is there any of the commissioners there or the CAO? If not, that's okay. I would just request that when the minutes come to council for this committee that each commissioner be given the opportunity to provide their input on return to work if they've started or if they plan on starting.
So through the chair, David, here, I could say that the clerk captured it well in the sense of right now we have up to 25%. Now that's predominantly for administrative buildings. As you know, our transit operators are still physically coming into work, as well as many recreation staff, our firefighters, etc. So predominantly administrative buildings up to 25% today. We are considering up to 60% effective in November, but that is also being monitored regularly depending on the numbers from public health as well as advice from our public health partners in the province. And really having an eye more towards January. But even if it was up to 60%, it still allows us that flexibility. Now we've done that predominantly to have business continuity from, whether it's licensing renewals or permit applications, et cetera, to keep business flowing from a municipal context. But I can say that, as an example, the planning staff, the vast majority are working from home, as well as the administrative offices. The vast majority continue to work from home. I don't see that changing really until we have the discussion of up to 60% or beyond, which likely would be more into January. And so I'm not sure if that answers your question. We have given the flexibility to the respective areas because each area is quite different and unique. So there is that level of discretion, as you referenced, amongst each of the commissioners as well. Thank you.
Yeah, and thank you, David. And you do answer my question. I guess what I'm kind of thinking is, I believe, and it kind of goes on to what Councillor Vincente was saying, with caution, as some members of council do have young children that are unvaccinated or possibly have people in their household that can't get vaccinated. So when we're looking at the hybrid model or developing a strategy in the city, if we're currently at 25% and looking to move that up in the near future, I think it's important that council lead by example. And I guess a follow-up question then would be, if council started coming in, Peter, up to 25% now, does the composition of the clerk's office need to change to support any more? Currently you have Mayor Brown that comes in, and the off time another councillor will come in as well. If we were to go up to 25%, would you need require more staff in the council chambers to support?
Through you, Mr. Chair, at this point I would say probably not. We would just, the only additional thing that we would have to be monitoring is integration of the request to speak or request to question list that's physically in chambers that members use, if you recall, and try to integrate that, I guess, through verbal cues to the chair of the meeting with the chat function that we use for remote participants, because there is no way technically to actually integrate those at this point. So it would just be additional monitoring of that if there are more than one member present in the chambers. The challenge will be is our back to chambers model that we had in place actually since March of last year, not anticipating when COVID would potentially end, is we probably can physically locate within the current 11 seats right now, probably 5 members, including the chair with spacing. And so that's something we could accommodate comfortably. If all 11 members decided to participate in the meeting in person, we would have to look at alternative seating arrangements, either in the senior administration row or in the back row where I'm currently sitting to accommodate additional members. And we've seen that as well in other municipalities that are looking towards the hybrid model, is a statement to the members if they are returning. Depending how many members return, there may not be a guarantee that they're sitting in their same seat to ensure that proper physical distancing and all those other precautions are in place.
Okay, so Peter, then I guess my only request, I don't know, I can't really request anything at the committee, but I can certainly do it when the minutes come to council. If there are any strategies that are being developed within the corporation, I think that it is important that we as councillors do lead by example, and any strategies that are developed, a strategy is developed for council to start returning to chambers, and I think I would request that maybe you and we could say Mayor Brown or the chairs of the committees develop something so that we do have it in the works to see which councillors would come back at which committees, and that's all. That would be all done prior to and implemented prior to us requesting staff come back to the City of Brampton. Thank you. Those are my questions and comments, Mr. Chair. Thank you for allowing me the opportunity again as a non-committee member.
Thank you, Councillor Palashi. Just to go on to that, I know, like, it's not only the councillors, like, I don't have any small kids, but some of the councillors doing staff. Councillor Palashi brings up a good point. Can we, let's say we're chairing this meeting this morning, only the chair and the vice chair with certain staff come in and we could all use be online to not have all the seating arrangements and only have certain councillors in, the chairs and vice chair for every other meeting, and with the mayor if it's involved in some staff. Would that be possible?
Through you, Mr. Chair, yes, that is possible if that's the will of council eventually. The chair and vice chair, which is 1 to 2 people in the chambers, can be accommodated, certainly, yes.
Yeah, okay, that's I think that would be a great idea. I get it's not only the councillors, there's also staff that have kids and maybe not vaccinated for certain reasons, and until everything gets lifted, I think that would be a great idea. Okay, thank you. So I see no more speakers. I have a motion by Councillor Dillon to receive the discussion items. Anyone opposed? I see none. That carries. Thank you. We'll move on to 9.2. It's a discussion regarding council office support model. And Mr. Clerk, it's back to you for discussion.
Through you, Mr. Chair, I'll be much briefer on this item to allow any discussion from the committee. So when council decided in early 2019 to move to the council office support model that's currently in effect from a corporate support model, and it came into effect in April of 2019, Council also authorized this committee to effectively serve as an implementation committee or de facto steering committee, and sort of to conduct an annual review discussion sort of whether or not the current model is working and if there's any opportunities for improvement or change. So I've put this on the agenda just as with the last update. was in February of 2020 at this committee in terms of the council office support model. And members may recall that in January of this year, the council office management framework, sort of a way to treat council office staff that are sort of in between, obviously the elected officials, supporting the elected officials, but also staff of the corporation. So that was adopted in January of this year. But we wanted to use this as an opportunity to see, hear from members, see how it is going. Are there any areas that we need to possibly focus on? And obviously anticipating that we're coming up to budget deliberations. I'm not hearing anything directly, but this is an opportunity to ask any questions and have a discussion about whether the model is suiting the needs of the members moving forward.
Thank you, Mr. Clerk. I don't see any questions there. I guess everyone's quite happy. I am. So I don't see any questions, so I'm going to move this forward, and it's moved by Councillor Williams to receive the discussion items. Is there anyone opposed to this motion? Seeing none, that carries. So we'll move on to 9.3. And this is something I requested, Mr. Clerk. It's about we have a certain policies on the roles and events and discussions, and when the mayor goes to an event, how I guess area councilors should be involved, and when we have town halls. I remember that we did have a policy that we're allowed to have 2 town halls per year to not occupy staff's time at night, and both councillors were supposed to be part of that, and if staff's invited or being part of the town halls. So can you briefly maybe tell us the policies?
Through you, Mr. Chair, there is I guess I call it a civic events protocol that council adopted in 2019 that just speaks to if there are events, depending who is actually leading the event, whether it's a city-led event or somebody else leading it, what the roles might be in terms of speaking order and things like that. I do recall some discussion about town halls and limiting that, but I'll defer. I think is Greg Petty or present? Maybe if you can provide some advice and anecdotally, I'm just trying to recall if there was an actual council resolution quantifying how many town halls members could organize and the support level from staff.
Yeah, thank you, Pierre. Maybe some of the older councillors, I know Councillor Paleshi's online, and Martin Maderos and Councillor Dillon. I remember when we adopted the policy that both councillors should be, they're allowed to have two town halls per year. Both councillors have to be invited only if staff's there. If it's on their own, they could do what they want. And that was because, if we start having town halls every week and they go by all the councillors, we're going to occupy lots of the staff time in the evenings. And most town halls are done in the evenings. And I remember we did that. And the other protocol I remember is when if there's any event, if it's a city event like a flag raising, yes, everyone gets the email. But if there's an event in a certain area and the mayor's invited, both councillors from the area should be invited. So just wanted to, that's the only thing I'm trying to bring forward. Maybe I'll wait for the staff to say what they have to say.
Yes, good morning, committee chair and members of council. This is Greg from the Events and Protocol Office. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can. Go ahead, Greg.
Okay, thank you. So the events, so the civic events protocol speaks to the openings, ribbon cuttings, corporate events, but there is the scope of work does not include town halls, so it doesn't speak to the amount of town halls councillors may have per ward. However, if that is something that is the wish of council, we may make amendments and bring it back to this committee at a later date.
Okay, I thought for sure we were only allowed to have 2 when the last CEO was there, because we're going to start having town halls every week. And if I get you on my town hall, it's going to be hard for you to say no to the others, and that's going to occupy a lot of staff time. But we could bring it back, I guess, and But for the events, yes, I understand that when it's the city event, all councils are invited. But when a certain event goes in a certain area, the 2 area councils should always be copied. And, I've been getting some calls from other councilors that that's not happening. And so we should make it fair across the board. So that's the only thing I'm asking. So maybe, Peter, we could bring this back. I don't know if we're going to bring it to the committee, or maybe we'll bring it back to the November meeting, our meeting, what we have next.
Through you, Mr. Chair, we can bring it to the next governance committee meeting in November, and I'll look through the council decision record in terms of what council had decided on town hall meetings and support levels and how many.
Yeah, and thank you so much. Yeah, that's great. I don't see any speakers, so we'll move on. I have a motion for Councilor Vicente to move on. Okay, there's no objection. The next one is a discussion regarding a protocol review update. Mr. Clerk, you added this one up for discussion?
Through you, Mr. Chair, yes. So I just wanted to provide a brief update on the procedure bylaw review. Committee members will recall there is a subcommittee that's been established that does report through this committee on the procedure bylaw review. The procedure bylaw is a 4-stage review process. The first stage was understanding existing rules and issues and opportunities, and we've been reviewing council requests. We've had opportunity for individual members and senior staff to provide input. We have received some of that. We've shared some of that information in terms of some of the issues we heard at the last meeting in June of the subcommittee. Our next phase was some engagement and benchmarking. We have shared with the committee, I believe it's a document that's well over 1,000 pages of various procedure bylaws from, I think, 20-some municipalities across the province. We are going through that to review and see what, if there's sort of best practices in there or common practices that we may not have in our current procedure bylaw to bring forward. And we'd also contemplated doing an engagement through a online survey. That was intended to go live in the spring and early summer for a number of different reasons, priorities. It hasn't proceeded. It's primarily been, I haven't been able to get the work done. We've had great support from Strategic Communications. So we do have a draft survey that we are planning to release publicly for probably a 3-week period to start to gather some information from the public and previous delegates regarding their opinions on accessing meetings, participation in meetings, awareness about meetings and council decision-making, and awareness in terms of outcomes. So if the committee wishes, we can share sort of some of the draft questions. I think it's about just under 20 questions, I believe. It'll be an online survey. So we can share that if the committee wishes and answer any questions that you may have. As part of that, we're going through and we're making identifying a sort of a red line copy of the current procedure bylaw, identifying some housekeeping changes, but also identifying some substantive changes based on what we've been hearing so far to bring forward to the subcommittee for its consideration. And then the 4th phase will be recommending the necessary procedure bylaw amendments. So we were looking, to be quite frank, we're probably about 2 months behind schedule, and that's on me for other workload issues. But we're hoping to catch up. Our goal is still to have a draft of a procedure bylaw ready for council consideration and/or public consultation by the end of this year. And we will be proceeding to work with Chair Peleschi, the chair of the subcommittee, to schedule some additional meetings of the procedure bylaw review subcommittee to proceed to continue with our review. A couple of things that we're sort of focusing on right now, what we've heard is, one is new business, adding new business, when, where, why, how. As you know, right now the rules for adding new business is simply a 2/3 vote. And we've talked in the past through the subcommittee of perhaps some criteria for adding new business. So we're seeing that there are a number of procedure bylaws in different municipalities that speak to possibly things that are only urgent, and urgent being defined as, both emergency, time sensitivity, statutory deadline, things like that, but also with something probably in writing, which would then require a member to not only just walk something onto a meeting, but perhaps prepare something or deliberate on it in advance of the meeting, to state a reason why it's considered urgent. And can't be considered at the next regular meeting. So we'll be drafting some thoughts on that and some options for the subcommittee's consideration. And the next area that we're looking at, that we did hear from some members, is on delegations. When, where, how delegations occur. So right now our current rules are very broad and very open, quite honestly. And we are seeing from some best practices in other municipalities that there are a number of municipalities that put some further boundaries around delegations in terms of the timing of when they can submit a delegation. There are certain types of delegations that should be non-starters, what we're seeing in other municipalities, whether it's things on procurement, employment matters, labor relations, council or court or tribunal matters, matters relating to employee relations, statutory public meeting items. So if there's a statutory public meeting engagement process already established, then delegation shouldn't be able to circumvent that. So we're compiling all of that, and we'll be bringing that forward to the subcommittee as well. And one of the key things that we are seeing in some bylaws is that once somebody does delegate at a standing committee per se, they cannot delegate at the council. So they don't get two kicks at the can, but that's something that I know there's been some debate and questions from some members of the subcommittee on that, but that is what we're looking at for possible options to bring forward to the subcommittee for deliberations and ultimately a recommendation to council. So those are two areas in particular that we're focusing on. The rest are generally housekeeping matters, and just doing a nice sort of overhaul of the procedure bylaw so it's more user-friendly, more understandable in plain language format, and people can read the rules and understand the rules. So I'd be happy to answer any questions that members may have, Mr. Chair. Or to show the survey if you wish to see the survey.
And I don't see any members. So Peter, I'm going to ask a quick questions. So when it comes to adding of anything on the agenda, is that all the other committees, the same planning? We get a lot of times last minute stuff from staff. That will be the same?
So that's something that we can look at as well. So right now, the key deadline is when we publish the original agenda. So the rule of thumb is if it's not listed on the agenda, then it needs to be added by a 2/3 vote of the decision body, whether it's council or committee. What we know is, and for a variety of reasons, there is some staff reports that there's information for which is outside the city's control that we're waiting for, things like that. So what happens in those events is we list an item on the agenda with the concurrence and approval of the senior administration, and then when the report is ready, if there's that additional information that's required from outside that's beyond the municipality's control, then we publish that report. So it's listed on the agenda, but I do understand and the concerns that I think that you're expressing, Councillor, or Mr. Chair, that sometimes things are coming too late. So we're publishing a revised agenda right now for standing committees and city council, usually on a Tuesday, and quite frankly, a Tuesday late afternoon, or I'll probably say evening, and the meeting literally is just over 12 hours from there. So that it's not a lot of time for the members to understand what's been added to the agenda in terms of supplementary information to things that were already listed on the agenda, and for the public and staff to prepare and possibly participate in the meeting. So maybe we're looking at backing up some of our agenda publication and revised agenda timelines. Those are things that we're looking at to go in concert with any new rules about adding new business on the meeting. So it's twofold. It's net new business. It's that what are the rules to get net new business that's not listed on the agenda on a meeting agenda, and those items that are listed on the agenda that are going to be coming prior to the meeting, how do we get those in the hands of members and the public and staff as soon as possible before the meeting starts?
Yeah, thank you. And I do agree, because, it's hard on staff, and sometimes we get it the day before, and now we have to start reading, and we don't want to have the time to do our homework. I think Councillor Pelletier is chair. He'll take care of that part. I know it's a region. You're not allowed to walk things on. If it's not on the agenda, they have discussion. The other question I want to ask, like I hear from some couple of councillors, we're dealing with a lot of stuff of federal, provincial stuff, which is not our mandate here at the city. Is this going to be also part of the policies? like if it's not, has nothing to do with us, we gotta, stop looking into federal and provincial issues and look into, like, municipal building, what our job is and what our role is.
Through you, Mr. Chair, there is a rule already in our procedure bylaw, and it's in many procedure bylaws that speak to really matters that are what they refer to as ultra vires or outside the jurisdiction of the municipality should not be before council. So that's been relied on in the past to say that this proposed new business item or this proposed item really isn't a municipal issue. However, I think for a number of factors, one of which is COVID and the prevalence of COVID and how it's sort of bringing everybody closer together, whether we like it or not. Municipalities have played a very strong role in that. And I think just that globally, municipalities have a significant voice in the affairs of the world, and it is trying to balance that in terms of where a municipality can affect some influence. I can tell you that this is a relatively new phenomena over the last probably 10 years or so, where municipalities have started to take a role in being influencers, I guess if you want to call it, in matters that are not necessarily within the quick confines of provincial legislation in terms of what a municipality can and cannot do. So there's a lot of advocacy going on that municipalities are sort of starting to take a role in that area. But it is up to council, so if council wishes to put some rules in effect to try and limit that to some extent, that is something we can look at. In our review of procedure bylaws so far, I haven't come across anything that's been that explicit in terms of limiting a municipal council's role back to its sort of, bread and butter, municipal act, planning act, that kind of stuff. I think seems to be a common recognition that municipalities do have a voice, an important voice, and they need to express themselves in terms of making sure that there's change.
Yeah, and I appreciate it. I just feel bad for staff. Sometimes they have to do certain work which is not their jurisdiction. That's the only thing. And I understand it's COVID. We've been working really hard and bringing policies forward and trying to push the federal and provincial, but a lot of times, a lot of stuff shouldn't be added. But I'll leave it up to council. Thank you so much. So I have a motion moved by Councilor Medeiros.
Mr. Chair?
I'm sorry. I see Councilor Medeiros on the board. I'm sorry. Go ahead, Councilor Medeiros.
Yeah, and thank you very much, Chair Fortini, for raising that. And I do share some of your thoughts, and I do appreciate what the city clerk has stated. I guess what's becoming a little frustrating are our agendas and our meeting times have really gone beyond. They become really. We started in the morning and we're going late in the afternoon and stuff, and sometimes in terms of what's really relevant to the municipality, we're spending a lot of time on issues and not necessarily, as much as they're important, but it just seems that from our agenda management, that those are sort of concerns that we're having, because we seem to be spinning our wheels on a lot of items that, yes, impact the city directly, indirectly impact us. And I just find, and again, I'm not sure if they're doing something different at the region that we're not doing, or maybe the advocacy piece is not as strong at the region when it comes to, issues that are not necessarily under our purview, but we seem to be sort of moving resources on. I understand that that's more of a political consideration. I do find that, there's been a lot of time being spent on stuff that is not really sort of the bread and butter of the municipality. We've taken on a lot. It's becoming an expansive sort of agenda and interest. And I don't know what mechanisms we have, understanding that it's still within, every councillor's right to, as long as they get support from, 6 members, to bring items that they feel are important to, them or the municipality. But I find the time management are sort of focused on, municipal issues, and sometimes I'm finding that even understanding, roles and responsibilities of what we do, it's almost like, I say this respectfully, some people need refreshers on what exactly we're responsible for, what are responsible, and where we should be putting our resources, because I find, staff are involved in a lot of activity which are not necessarily under our purview, important issues. And I don't get me wrong, and I understand its purpose, but we're almost spreading our resources thin. And then after having to engage staff in time and money, working on issues that are not under our purview, which takes away from us keeping the focus on, delivering the services and programs that, what we have on. So in terms of what we can do about it, I'm not sure. Those are good discussions. And I do appreciate your comments, Peter, in terms of, we've become more of a political actor from municipality. And, there might be some who make that case. And so I struggle with that. I just find right now our agenda setting. Also, I found recently there's been a lot of agenda changes at last minute, changing speaker orders. There was a month ago where there was a speaking order, and a councillor moved a speaking order, and all of a sudden, we had other delegations, and one of the delegates was sort of the focus of the delegations which were added, and I don't think that was right. In terms of colleagues understanding what the delegation was about. So, I don't know, as part of our looking at our policies and procedures, that if anyone wants to change an order of a delegation, there should be a strong rationale why they want to change the order, and B, we should understand what the focus and topic of the delegation is going to be before we consider changing it. And a lot of times we've been just rubber stamping it because we respect what the colleague wants to do, but not understanding what it's for. For example, when I hear colleagues say, well, that person has time commitments, so we need to can we make the change for them? Well, that's a big disrespect for other delegations who have been waiting, and they also have time considerations. So I think the decorum of the way we run our meetings has to be addressed, and I think ultimately we have to show responsibility, but there should be some city clerk understanding when someone wants to change either an order of a delegation or wants to add delegations. And I understand there's going to be circumstances where we need to, and it's relevant for the discussion. But I do the mistake of accepting the change without knowing the full focus and the impact of it. City clerk, just a question through the chair. Are we allowed, when someone requests a delegation, to move a delegation change, are we allowed to ask the rationale for what that change is during it, or is there any requirement for them to provide a rationale for it?
Through you, Mr. Chair, currently there's no rationale, although that would be reasonable to expect if somebody is proposing to vary the order. It is only a majority vote, but if a motion is moved to vary the order, it's a procedural motion, and it would be fair for a member of council to ask a reason why if a reason is not given, and to essentially have that procedural debate before actually voting on it. So that is within the rules that council has in place right now. So Councillor Medeiros, you've raised something that we'll probably look at in terms of, perhaps if there is new business added, whether it's a delegation or literally a discussion item or something else, new business, if it does meet that threshold for getting added to the agenda, right now it's 2/3, whether or not that test is higher or lower, council will determine. But maybe there's a rule that once it's added to the agenda, there needs to be an affording of it further respect, I guess, for the other items that are already listed on the agenda, and maybe it is a higher test in those particular cases to vary the order, that maybe it is a higher than a majority vote to add new business and then to move it ahead of business that's already on the agenda. So I'm just sort of thinking out loud, but that's something we'll take a look at. I don't recall seeing that per se in other procedure bylaws at the moment, but we certainly can investigate that.
Yeah, and it's one thing, I know at the region, for example, if you want to add delegations, there is that time constraint, that's one thing, but on a couple of instances where we had delegations, they weren't relevant to any of the items which were already approved on the agenda. And again, one of the fears I always have is that, you could go become too restrictive, understanding that there are things that happen, news events, issues that arise that need that immediate attention. And that's always relative. People have different thoughts on what is immediately needs to be reacted to. But I do think that we should consider, that, especially when we're changing orders and everything else, because, the last couple of times, the way it's been used, not understanding the rationale. And I myself, take full account for my lack of questioning or understanding. There's been a couple of instances where I just think that it wasn't appropriate for some of these additions to an agenda that really didn't have that subject matter on it. So I do appreciate at least us looking at it and seeing if there's any best practices. But thank you very much, Peter.
Thank you, Councilor Maderos. Yeah, I like to agree. It's a win-win thing or a lose-lose thing. You say no, that you don't want someone to jump ahead and it's offensive, but meanwhile, it's offensive to the others who are already on the agenda and waiting. So, okay, so I have a motion moved by Councilor Maderos. Anyone opposed? Being none, it carries. Deferred, so we're going to have 13, we'll jump to 13. Councilor question period. Any councilor have any? Seeing none. Mr. Clerk, I wanted to add something, and I forgot to add it on this one for the next meeting on naming of parks and streets. I know we have a policy, but remember we did talk about it, and it looks like we're going to be running out of parks. So if we could add that maybe on the next November meeting.
Certainly, Mr. Chair. Yes, we can add something about the street and park naming process as it exists under the asset naming policy and the role of the council reference groups. And yes, we can.
I see Councilor Maderos.
Yeah, and my apologies, Chair, and through you, and apologies to my colleagues. Just regarding the discussion of us coming in or not, and please feel free to jump in and correct me. What I would like to see, City Clerk, whatever decision we made in terms of a hybrid model of people coming in or councillors not coming in or having certain percentage of staff, that I'd like to have clear direction from our Peel Regional Medical Officer, because in my conversations with him and what I've seen in public statements, he's encouraged employers to still have their employees not come into work. And again, as far as I know, I haven't seen it updated. So, anything that we do, I would want at least some form of accompanying letter or some form of guidance from our Peel Public Medical Officer, so that there's consistency around the region, and we're not doing something, because at the end of the day, what I think really doesn't matter. I'm not an expert when it comes to public health, and I'd really want that guidance from our medical officer. So, in the form of a question, can we ensure that any type of sort of action we take, that it gets consulted with our Peel medical officer?
Certainly, through you, Mr. Chair. Yes, Councillor, we'll do that as part of any return to chambers, in-person meetings and things like that. Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you. So we'll move on to 14, this public question period. Mr. Clerk, do we have anybody sending any questions submitted during this meeting?
We do not, Mr. Chair.
Okay, so we'll move on to, there's no closed sessions, adjournment. Our next committee meeting will be scheduled for November 22nd at 9:30. I have a motion by Councilor Williams to adjourn today's meeting. Is anyone opposed? Seeing none. Thank you so much for everyone. Thank you, Mr. Clerk. Stay safe, stay healthy, get vaccinated, practice social distancing, and wear masks indoor and outdoor. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, members of the committee. We're just going to wait for the live stream to end momentarily.